Hello everyone, welcome back to the Race.dev Hacktoberfest Help Desk. My name is Joe and I'm your host for the show, which if you've tuned into our previous shows, you will know is not the plan. We had another host today that couldn't make it, so I'm super excited to be back, especially because our guest for this evening's show, it's been a long time since we caught up and things have changed, and I've already been given a teaser for that story, and they wouldn't tell me the rest of it, so it's going to be really great. For those of you who are new to the show, this is the Hacktoberfest Help Desk. It's a resource to help you with all of your Hacktoberfest contributions. We're here giving you tips and tricks to land those PRs, as well as showing you new projects and new ways to contribute to those projects, and we're also kind of talking around other people's developer journeys and how open source has helped them, how their tech careers have evolved and changed, and how they, as developers and as technical people, have evolved and changed. And we're going to be doing a little bit in the show today. We're back with our favourite game, where we make our guests review their old code and tell us what they would do differently today. It's just always so much fun, and the project tonight is super cool, and we'll be talking about that very shortly. But before I bring our guest on and get into the show, a couple of house things to run through for those of you who watched the show before. This will be no surprise. First up, the chat. As I said, we are here to help you, which means that the chat is all yours. Please ask questions as we go along. If the questions are relevant to what we're speaking about, it's easy for us to answer those as we go. If it's off topic, totally fine. Please ask those off topic questions. We love going on a tangent, but it might take us a little while to get to those questions. We'll do it before the end of the show, but we need to find a good place to slot it in. So don't be alarmed if we don't answer your question straight away. The other thing about the chat is links. We do run a moderation bot to filter out any links because unfortunately there is spam on the internet. Big surprise. But you are welcome to post links. Just give me a heads up first by mentioning RaiseDevs in the chat. So @RaiseDevs, let me know you're going to post a link. I'll add you to the permit list, and that way your link won't get automatically deleted from the chat. So other than that, we have been live 3 times a day all throughout Hacktoberfest, but there's only 1 day left. So I'm going to send you to our schedule, but you can ignore all of it except for tomorrow. It's all gone now. You've missed it all. The recordings are still up on our Twitch page. So you can still go back and watch the videos, but we do just have 3 shows left after this one. No, 2 shows left after this one, in fact. We've had a little bit of a change of schedule, but there's 2 shows tomorrow. At the end of this show, I'll run you through what we've got going on tomorrow. Our last show of Hacktoberfest is a real banger. I cannot wait. So hang around at the end, and I'll do a brief teaser of what's to come. But if you want to have a look for yourself in the meantime, you can do that at twitch.tv/RaiseDevs schedule. So the last thing from me before I bring on our guest and we get going, if you haven't heard of Raise.dev already, you can find us at Raise.dev. We are a service to help you level up your developer career, and we do that by matching you with expert coaches who have got amazing experience. They've been through it all themselves, and they will help you get the experience that you need to make the next jump in your developer career, whether that's getting your first developer job after a bootcamp or after a career change, or going for that raise or promotion, moving from mid-level to senior, becoming an engineering manager, all of that good stuff. We want to help you do that, and we are completely free whilst we're in early access. So you can sign up today, get matched with a coach, and not pay a penny. So, super rad. You can sign up below, and I'll talk about that again at the end of the show. So that's everything from me, I believe. I'm running through my mental checklist. This is the 10 p.m. show where everything is a haze. I think we're good. Okay, let me bring on our guest. Please welcome Sam to the stage. Hey, Sam, how you doing?
Hi, good. How are you? Well, we just had this conversation. We just had this bit of the conversation before. We're like, well, as good as you can be in 2020, I guess.
Yes, yeah. I was saying I need to get out of the habit of asking people how they're doing, because multiple guests have pointed out to me now that it's just a terrible question to ask right now. I need to find a new intro question. How are those plants behind you? They look like flourishing, healthy plants. That's going to be my new intro question.
Have actually, I mean, I can go into that. These have actually been a little bit of a pet project of mine. They're supposed to be my mum's, but I've taken a certain liking to them. I have, because the reason I have is because they're very, very fussy. You can't leave them outside when it's colder than 14 degrees Celsius. Don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. And they have these nice little pink flowers that come up.
Nice.
Yeah, they're called bougainvillea.
Oh, I know bougainvillea. My mum has a bougainvillea. It must be a mum thing.
It's maybe a mum thing.
Anyway, would you like to introduce yourself to the folks in the chat?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Sam. I am currently a senior software developer. I have been in the tech industry for a little while, and well, you'll hear probably more about my career just in a second as you start asking me questions. But yeah, I'm very pleased to be here. I'm looking forward to having a bit of a catch up as well, because it has been a while since we've talked. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess before I get into that and set the context for how Sam and I met and the last time we spoke, how the show's going to work for those of you in the chat that you haven't seen before. We're going to start off talking a little bit about Sam's career, talk about their developer journey, because one of the things we want to do on the show is show the many winding paths through tech and the many ways that you can use technical skills that aren't necessarily just software engineering, but that intersect nicely with software engineering, and that's definitely true here. And then we're going to dive into the project that Sam has bought for us today, which is very exciting and is actually one I've heard a lot about. As we were kind of catching from the beginning, I had like this crazy recollection of a particularly bonkers time I've heard about this project, and so I'm excited to actually see the code. So to start off with, when you and I met, you were a developer advocate at Semel, which LGTM, which later got acquired by GitHub, hence the GitHub staff T-shirt. A little bit before that, we'll get through all of that and get to that bit. But where did your developer journey start? Like, where did your career start?
Well, I think before I had a career, I definitely had an interest. I think I was always going to be, well, a lot of my family are in the film industry.
Okay.
So before even thinking about coding, I sort of had an interest in film production, and in particular, like special effects, editing. I always thought that I was going to end up going in that direction.
Fascinating.
And then I get my first computer that's like my own computer and not the family computer. One of my dad's work hand-me-downs.
Yeah.
And just started playing around with it. I think I was 10 or 11 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Had Macromedia Flash 8 and Dreamweaver 2.
I was waiting for that. It is amazing how many of these shows start with Macromedia Flash or Macromedia Dreamweaver. Literally today, we had it just before this as well. Perfect. Okay.
I mean, what do you want to do when you're that age? You want to make fun stuff. You want to make little animations or little games.
Especially if your family are in the film industry. Like, of course you're going to go make films and Flash, right?
Right, exactly. But, I ended up going down this route, playing more and more with different bits of software, making different things. And then, before I knew it, I was just coding like every waking minute. I didn't go outside to socialize. I didn't even really, I went around to friends' houses, maybe play some video games, but basically all of my free time was making stuff. Like you got so much more fulfillment out of making something from your imagination, even though it's like virtual, like on the screen. It's still very real. Like you can have anything come from your imagination and just make it. Like I want a thing that does this, and you can do it. Same for basically any sort of creative art. It's another form of form of creativity for me.
I think there's something particular to that as well about, maybe it's just because like computing is not as exciting to me now, but I feel like there is something particular to that about like that older generation of computers where it did all feel just a little bit more tactile. It didn't feel as well, like we say now, like, oh, it's on the screen, and like when you say that, you tend to get the image of like, like an iPad or like something very cold and clinical, like modern devices, whereas like big chunky CRT monitors that buzzed and all that kind of stuff. It was like a different digital making experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, like my first laptop still had, it was a laptop. It had an LCD screen. It was still a little flat, but fancy. Big bezels, relatively bigger form factor. Definitely,
a laptop that would break your lap if you were to actually use it as a laptop.
Yeah, it was a laptop that stayed on the desk. It was a lap desktop, basically. So I was getting good with computers. I was experimenting like that. The biggest thing for me, I think that the biggest gift that I got was that I was able to experiment fearlessly from an early age, and just click on things to see what happens. Or what happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? I think one of the things that I've seen sort of gets harder as you get older, even as someone who has had this in the past, is it's harder, I think, to experiment fearlessly, and that's something that if you can focus on cultivating, is always going to be beneficial, regardless of what you're trying to learn. Like right now, I'm trying to learn some languages, and one of the ways of experimenting is to give a bit of context. I'm planning on learning on Arabic. I'm not sure if this is ever going to happen. But one of the things I'm experimenting with is
tough language to learn.
Right, yeah. Like, what happens if I put these letters together in Google Translate? Does it actually come out with a word? And is that something that I can pronounce?
Yeah.
Right. I'm not necessarily just going through a thing. And like that sort of experimentation, I think, is very, very important for learning.
Fascinating. Yeah, sorry, I just went on a tangent there because you were talking about like being able to pronounce the sounds. I had a friend here who moved here recently who can speak Arabic. One of my big issues with Dutch, is there are sounds in that language I
Oh,
physically can't pronounce, and that
yes.
friend was telling me that a lot of the sound, there's some sounds in Arabic that's similar to the sounds in Dutch that I struggle with. So
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that and just being like, oh no, I guess I have to cross Arabic off my list as well.
So like there's lots of like guttural and huz sort of
Yeah, sounds that
going
like
on.
I physically don't have the machinery to make. Anyway, so yeah, experimentation, which obviously is very good and
Yeah.
easy to do on computers. So
Yeah.
I can see that path, and that's now, yeah, connecting some dots to the project that we're going to get on. So I guess like
Definitely.
that continued from like that long age through school up until like
Like
when you
A
start to
levels
make
basically, and
when
then
you start to make
college.
decisions about what you're studying and stuff.
Yeah. So when it came, it came to my GCSEs, I obviously picked something that
Right,
was ICT. I obviously had an ICT choice. At the
right.
time, I think it was something called iMedia, which is
Yes.
I don't know if you've heard about that course, but it wasn't a very good course. It was like,
I can almost like the family of like weird. The IT course I did in GCSE, I think was like, I think it was a BTEC. But yeah,
mm,
like there was lots of weird IT adjacent qualifications going around, so I can definitely imagine iMedia gives me a certain feeling to it. Yeah,
yeah, you know what to expect. You know
yeah,
what it
right,
pertains to.
yeah,
So that didn't really get me that much enjoyment or
right,
really teach me anything that I hadn't already played around with.
right,
Um, and then when it came to my A levels, I did end up picking
sure.
computing
Right.
as
Which,
a
for any
result.
US viewers, A levels is a UK qualification between the ages of 16 and 18, and those grades basically decide what college you go to. Is the only function of those grades.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
sort
that
of
makes sense.
like junior, senior year because
Sure.
it goes what
Right.
freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Is that right?
I honestly have no idea. I've
Yeah, I
worked in
think
computing education now for 5 years and couldn't tell you.
I think it's junior, senior. Oh wait, no, it's that would be sophomore year.
Hmm.
That would be
Okay.
freshman, sophomore, in high school, and then for my A levels, which I think would be junior, senior,
Yeah.
I ended up picking computing. Yeah,
Cool. Awesome.
and that again, it was a course that I wasn't really finding that fulfilling.
Right.
I was enjoying the maths that I was
Hmm.
doing much more. I was enjoying physics much more.
Sure.
Um, but then I went ahead and did the thing that I'm not sure how many people that you've interviewed have had this sort of classical beginning of the journey
Right.
for education. But I ended up picking computer science
Right.
for undergrad.
Yeah. We've had quite a few degree people. I think what's been
Yeah,
interesting about we've had a lot of career changes and quite a few people going through university, but the tales for university and how university was perceived were always a little bit different. Like
I have opinions.
cool, perfect, yeah, yeah. Like I'll guess just before this started off in like a very technical degree and wasn't finding super fulfilled by it, and so ended up changing to a different university entirely. So
Mm,
everyone, and especially when we've had a couple of guests on from English universities, where again for our US viewers, English university works a little bit different to American college. If you've never encountered this, where we don't have like the major minor system, where there's a little bit more scope to experiment and like choose different and like learn around the topic you're majoring in. It is basically cool. You're here to study this thing. You will spend 3 years only doing this thing and thinking entirely about this thing. You will never dare to think about a subject other than this thing. So it's like a very a very
basically, yeah.
monastic experience.
Right. I think for some people it works really well. For people
Mm,
that were lucky enough, like me, to know what they want to be doing at
right.
that point,
Yeah.
then it's great because you can then
Right.
like, yeah, I don't care about literature. I don't care about
Right.
other classical subjects. I can
I just care
just
about
focus on
computers. Yeah.
right. Let's go back and do this. That's
Right.
the thing that's going
Yeah.
to get me my career. That's all I
Right.
care about. But I
Yeah.
definitely, at least more than half of my friends that ended up going to university didn't
Right.
really go into university knowing that what they wanted to do.
Right. And also
Right.
like I don't if I imagine our experiences, or like for the people around you, are probably going to be a little bit similar to mine. Like when I went to university, I went to university for computer science as well, and that happened because I was into maths and physics, but didn't want to study those, and I liked computers. So I went, I like science, I like computers, computer science. Like I couldn't, no, I didn't have any idea what it actually was going into it, and I distinctly
Yeah.
remember like we had. The career people, the career counselors you talked to at school.
Yeah.
Like I literally asked one of them, like, "Do you know what computer science is?" I'm thinking of studying it, and they were like, IT, I guess. And so I like I'm lucky it did work out for me because I could have very easily shown up and had the worst 3 years of my life.
Totally.
But yeah.
I misspoke earlier. I didn't
Yeah.
actually apply for computer science. I applied for
Sure.
maths and computer science at the advice of my career advisor.
Right.
Right. It's like, oh, you could. I mean, your maths grades are great. Your computer grades are less great. Why are you doing computer science? Just do maths and computer science if you care about computers that much.
Right.
So I did.
Yeah.
And I had a number of lectures in my first week.
Yeah.
A couple of maths lectures that were actually, I mean, even if I was just doing computer science, they were still lectures that I would have taken.
Right.
But I hated them so much that I decided before the end of my first week to switch from maths and computer science to just computer science. I was like,
perfect.
Nope, I know I need to do this maths anyway, but if this is like the maths that computer scientists do, the maths that maths and computer scientists do are going to be, it's just going to be, this is going to be too much.
A very wise decision. Nikki T and I, welcome back, Nick. Thanks for joining us. Said, it's the degree you get to fix a family member's Wi-Fi printers, and that is too real. I'm not.
Oh man.
Obviously, I'm very sad about the current situation. The fact that Christmas is going to be different this year. I don't have to fix any family members' equipment this year. I'm in another country. Sorry, friends and family. Your IT problems are your own.
I mean, that was. We'll get to this in a second. I spent a few years in San Francisco. That was the best way to get out of fixing
to wean
them
off the habit.
Yeah. Wi-Fi and printers.
So university. So obviously you go for university. I imagine. Did you go for the whole university? Did you get your computer science degree? How was that experience for you?
This is probably the start of my career where I would probably describe it as a series of lucky chances and commitment issues.
Okay.
Really starting with the change of the degree in the first week. It was smooth, but there were opportunities that presented themselves to me that made me question various aspects of what I was doing. So, first one that happened, the first couple of years were relatively smooth. Then in my third year, I had to do a project, like a sort of a bit more of a practical thing. So I started working. I picked something. I mostly picked the thing because I liked the tutor that I was going to be doing it with. Like he was really cool. I liked his teaching style. He was very opinionated about things. He had a lot of practical experience. So it was interesting. It was an interesting project. Trying to remember what the project was. I think it was. Do you remember Lego Mindstorms?
I do remember Lego Mindstorms. That was a big part of the robotics course at my uni as well.
Right. So what he wanted to do was get a Java virtual machine running on a Lego Mindstorms controller so that you could write software for it in Java rather than in the sort of Lego Mindstorms custom language thing.
Interesting. Okay.
I was like, this sounds like a cool project. I'm going to be learning about firmware. I'm going to be learning about flashing devices and all of that sort of stuff. And got a decent way through the project.
Right.
But at the same time that this was going on, I was getting a really, really big interest in distributed systems and cryptography and stuff like that. And like, especially user privacy or privacy. I always forget which one is which region now.
It's regional. I say privacy.
It is. Privacy, private. So privacy, I think, is American, and privacy is British, I think.
I'm a traitor.
That's what happens when you spend too much time in tech. You spend too much time on video calls to people from America, and they have a different way of saying things.
you drop all your U's.
I drop all my U's, and start pronouncing my R's. Where was I? I completely lost my train of thought. Project.
Right.
So I was getting interest in this other topic. So I wrote a blog post about this idea I had about how technology could look in the future. And someone at Qualcomm found this project. And then, for those that don't know, Qualcomm is a video chip manufacturer that they mostly use in mobile telephones, but pretty big. If you have a mobile phone, that isn't iPhone, you probably have a Qualcomm chip, and even then you probably have a Qualcomm chip. So someone at Qualcomm found it, and they really liked it, and then they sent it around internally. I later found out that about a few hundred people from Qualcomm ended up reading my blog post that was titled "The Future of Technology." So I was getting like really into this topic, and I realized that I wanted my third year project to be around this stuff. Mm-hmm. But we're already like halfway through the year. So what I end up doing is I asked, like, is it possible to switch projects? And they're like, it's possible. It's a bad
brave.
idea.
Yeah.
It's not brave. It's like, you will not get a good grade if you do that because you do not have enough time. And I'm like,
I see.
My heart's not in the first project. I wouldn't get a good grade anyway. I may as well try. So I had to put together a proposal for what I wanted this project to be. Like, prior, I just picked one that was already there. This one I needed to make my own proposal. And then, I shared it with my tutor. He said, okay, this looks fine, but you're going to be on your own because I don't know about this stuff. I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway.
Oh, boy.
So at the same time that's happening, I get a message from one of the executives of a particular team from Qualcomm saying, we read your blog post. We think it's really cool. We'd love for you to get involved in this project that was related to the like an open source consortium, I think, called AllJoin.
Okay.
Are you going to be at Mobile World Congress? And I was like, wait, what was that last one?
Yeah.
So that's a yearly conference that happens in Barcelona.
Right. And it's chaos.
It's chaos. It's like all of the big mobile manufacturers. It's where they go basically to showcase their phones. It's where all the reporters go, like Gizmodo or TechCrunch or whatever. It's where they go.
I guess the closest comparison for anyone who's aware of CES is it's kind of like Europe's CES, I guess.
Right, with geared towards mobile technology.
Yeah.
And I was like, so I responded, thank you. Yeah. No, I'm not going to be going to Mobile World Congress. I am a student. I am in the middle of term and I have no money.
Yeah.
So I think I got a private message being like, if you can get the time off, we'll pay for your ticket. And I was like, okay. I'm still in the middle of term. University's going to be strict. They're not going to let me just drop on my work for a week to go to Barcelona. Yeah. So I spoke with my tutor. I spoke with the department head. I spoke with my project tutor as well, and told them the situation.
Right.
And they said, okay, well, if you can secure the ticket, we will pay for your flights and accommodation, and you can get the week off.
Okay.
So I responded again to Qualcomm, and the next morning I woke up with a ticket in my inbox.
That's very cool. Huh.
But remember, at this point, this is right in the middle of me deciding to change my project.
Yeah.
So I'm already like, I really don't have enough time to get everything done.
Right, and now you're going to Barcelona for a week.
So then I go to Barcelona for a week. And then that also means I have to catch up with all of my lectures, all of my homework and everything.
Right.
Once I get back, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll keep on top of stuff. When I'm in Barcelona, I did not keep on top of stuff. When you go, oh yeah, this is going to be a work trip. This is same for work. It's the same as for uni. It doesn't happen. If you're in Barcelona, you're going to be spending time in Barcelona, enjoying Barcelona and socializing.
Especially again, as you said, during WC, which is like the event. It's not just limited to like the conference hall that the event.
Right. You have the after parties and all the like wining and dining and stuff. Like I had to just go to a number of dinners with Qualcomm, that I was invited to. Yeah. So no time for any of the work. So I come back from uni. I come back to uni. I got 3 weeks left of term. I'm like, right, crunch time. Suffice to say, I did not do that well on my project, and my exam results were okay.
Right.
Anyway, that's happening. That's the end of my third year. That's kind of I'm reaching the point where I'm going to be going into my master's degree because right from the start, I'm going to do 4 years because a master's is better than a bachelor's. It just makes sense.
Right.
So I have an internship with Semel the summer after my third year. Okay. Yeah, that's when that starts. So So that was a spin out from my university originally. Started a few years before I interned there. So they already had connections with the university, and they did like recruitment dinners and stuff. So I went through the usual interview process. I started my internship. Went really well. Really loved the company. Really loved what they did. It was very, very academic companies. Not your typical tech company. It's one of those.
We'll get. I guess we'll get on to explaining what Semel is in a moment.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I finished my internship.
Yeah.
And I'm facing one more year of academia, but this time, like my university in particular gets more and more theoretical and more mathematical.
Right.
The later you get in the courses.
Right. Which I guess makes sense because by the time if you're staying on for a master's, it's the sort of time where they're starting to prepare you for doing post
AI or
and also like doing PhDs and going down the academic track rather than going into industry and
exactly. And I was like, I don't want to do this.
Right.
You know what? I'm not going to do this. I'm going to see. But I'd also at this point at the start of my internship I started renting an apartment with 3 other friends from uni.
Right.
And we were locked in for a year contract. So I was going to be living here regardless of whether I was working or whether I was studying or not. Well, if I'm not studying, I sacrifice my student loan and my grant.
Right.
And I need to pay for this rent somehow. So I wonder if Semel will allow me to join a year earlier than I was going to, because they offered me a job at the end of my internship. I'm like, I'll reach out to them and see. So before actually speaking with the university and telling them that I was thinking about leaving in my 0th week of my 4th year, I actually went to Uga, the CEO of Semel, and said, if I leave uni, can I start working straight away? And he was like, I definitely think you should sleep on it. And if you decide that you still want to do this, you can start working tomorrow.
Nice.
And so it was a difficult situation for him because he was still tied to the university. He was still a professor of the university at the time.
Right, and here he is advocating for a student to
leave. So he had that in the back of his mind as well. But he recommended that I speak to everyone I need to at university. Right. I did. They were not happy that I was thinking about leaving. They decided to leave anyway. At the same time that this was happening, something else was happening at the side, which was there was a new specialist school for autistic kids that had opened up in the same city as my university. And they'd reached out to the university saying, is there anyone that would be willing to spend some time volunteering and helping us with a couple of students that we have that are they're really, really interested in computing, and we don't have the skills to teach them anything they don't know. Right. Like the level that the children are at already, or that the 1 or 2 particular children are at already, was way more advanced than any of the teachers were prepared for. This is secondary school or middle school up to second or high school, sort of level kids, age 10 to 18 or so. This was 2014.
Cool. Okay, cool. So I want to throw another bit of context there, which is that's the year after the UK government told all the IT teachers, congratulations, you teach computer science now, and gave them 6 weeks to retrain.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So that's the other part of this, which is like, not only have they got to teach computing and like the kids are already more advanced, but like they themselves are probably not computing teachers by training.
Right. I completely forgot about that. Yeah, because the skills behind, actually I was thinking about going into this as well.
Yeah.
The skills that you need as like a computer science, or the computer science skills, are very different to ICT skills. Same way that developer skills are different to ops skills, different to like administrative skills. They're all very crucial and important skills, but there is some overlap, and some people have skills in both fields.
Right.
But they are different. Just because you know one doesn't mean you automatically know the other. You have to learn that. So that was a tumultuous time.
Yeah, I was typing a reply to Nick who said, "Wow, I didn't know that," in the comments. I don't know why I was typing the reply because I'm on the stream. Yeah, it was a great idea in theory. Like they got a bunch of like the biggest computing figures in the UK and said like, well, those people came together. Lots of academics in computing, lots of industry figures in computing, and said like, hey, the fact that the UK teaches IT, which is essentially teaching Microsoft Word and Excel, is absurd, and we should update the curriculum to be computer science.
Which was a good idea in theory. Like that's
yeah.
yes.
But then in practice, what they seem to have somehow missed is that, like, the vast majority of practicing IT teachers aren't computer scientists. They are, the PE teacher that knows how to use Excel. They are the English teacher who has done presentations in PowerPoint. And, they were not... A lot of the schools in the country couldn't afford computing labs and computer scientists because, the industry disproportionately pays those people, and not many of them go into teaching.
Right, exactly. If you were at this point, if you were skilled enough to teach computer science properly, as the curriculum wanted, you could earn more money doing something else.
Yeah. And this led to like some really ridiculous situations that, like, even though they sound ridiculous, still obviously doesn't match to like the competitive environment. When I left uni, at the time, the government was offering people who would like commit to doing teacher training and like doing at least 2 years in teaching, like just a 20k bonus, which, like, when you're in your last year of uni and you're like, cool, I need to get a job now, the government rocks up and says, we'll give you 20k if you come be a teacher. Obviously that's actually pretty compelling, and that's like the state things we're in at the time. Also, the other fun bit of my favorite bit of this whole thing is like the guy who led the charge on this new curriculum is Simon Peyton Jones, i.e. the main Haskell programming language, who works at Microsoft Research. Super cool.
Yeah, his son, Michael Peyton Jones, was one of my co-workers at Samuel.
Awesome. Oh, I think we spoke about that actually. We must have done with my rabid Haskell fanboying.
Yeah, totally.
But okay, cool. So you started helping out the school with their teaching. I think there were
a couple of kids that I met once or I came out once or twice to help out. I was like, this is fun. Like I'm happy to spend a couple of hours here once a week. Like that sounds great. I'm like, well, if I'm starting a job, I can't do a full-time job in this. So when I went to Ugo, I was like, can I start working now? And is it okay if it's 4 days a week? So I did, and so Tuesdays was the day I was going to the schools. And then after a couple of weeks, they said, how about you spend a full day here once a week and you become a teacher, a proper, like, we pay you get a salary, a teacher salary. Nice. And I was like, a day a week teaching kids with autism about computer science sounds amazing. I'm super down. Now, there is definitely this trope, I think, about how late developers tend to get up and get ready for work, right? It's maybe sometimes you rock it at 10, sometimes you rock up at 11, some people come in at 1 p.m.
Yeah.
We're quite often night owls. Schools, however, have a very strict schedule.
Right.
You need to be at the school at a very specific time. I think it was a little after 8 a.m. That I needed to travel, and I also needed to travel a little further out of the city to get to the school.
Right.
Which meant that I had 2 Mondays a week. First Monday was on Monday, where I would get up, go to work, maybe rock up around 10 a.m. The next Monday was when I had to wake up 2.5 hours earlier to go teach a bunch of kids about something. And for those that don't know, teaching is really hard.
Right.
It is so hard. Once you're
back to it being a hard industry to get people to enter.
Not only does it pay bad, it is a very, very hard job.
Right.
So I was a teacher, and I ended up staying until the summer, and I was like, I'm sorry, but I can't anymore. I am exhausted. We could try and fit you on a different day if that's a big thing. I'm like, you know what, it's that, but it's also the fact that
juggle.
I mean, every single evening and basically all day, every weekend, I was creating course content, lesson preparation stuff, marking work. For one day a week gave me enough work outside of my working hours around the school, and I was like, I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And beyond that, I didn't feel like I was able to really give my full self to the like my. I wasn't able to teach the kids as well as I wanted to,
Right.
which was it was frustrating. I didn't have enough content. Like
Yeah.
the new computer science curriculum was still pretty fresh. There wasn't that much
Right.
content targeted at this age group. But
Yeah.
what's more, I, being autistic in various different levels on the spectrum, there were lots of other factors that came into teaching this group. I needed to keep them. You know, it's not enough to be like, here's a thing that you're going to learn, and here's how to learn it. You needed to also give a reason for why it was compelling for them to learn it.
Right.
Like, you can learn this because the result is you're going to have a game that you've made that you can choose how it behaves.
Yeah.
But even that's not enough. You need to give them enough snippets of what of things improving. They need to have a really fast sort of cycle of putting effort in and getting something back before it makes sense for them as to why they should put the effort in. Okay. Some kids, you know, hooked onto it straight away. And I'm like, oh, you are exactly like I was at your age. I totally understand the way that you're thinking right now, and it's brilliant. And there are some other kids who need a little bit more guidance, a little bit more encouragement, a little bit more reasoning behind it. So, but it was very, very interesting. I definitely left that job with an overwhelming appreciation for people who are going to teaching, especially teaching with special needs when special needs are involved.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
On brand new rickety curriculum.
Yeah.
So I guess from then on, it was semi full time.
It was semi full time, but I still had certain commitment issues. The first commitment issue, or the next commitment issue that came up, was one about location. Like, I'm done with living in the UK. I need to move somewhere. I'm bored. I want to be somewhere different. And I was thinking about moving to Spain. I'm going to go live in Spain. I'm going to pick a different career.
World Congress every day, baby.
Yeah, totally. Live it up in Barcelona.
Yeah.
And then, but what I found out shortly after, you know, I was floating the idea with some of my colleagues. Would, you know, working remotely work? I'd be okay with reduced pay, all that stuff. Yeah, we Spain.
Don't take that from Hugh. Hugh will woo anywhere that's hot.
Spain, anywhere in the Mediterranean is kind of perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, like, a different climate was one of the things that I wanted, and my CEO told me, like, hey, so I know that you're thinking about moving somewhere different.
Yeah.
How does San Francisco sound? Because we're going to set up an office in San Francisco. And I was like, not what I had in mind, but definitely interesting. And, you know, I had a few people that I knew that lived out in San Francisco at the time. I don't think we'd met yet. So you weren't one of them.
No.
I was like, yeah, San Francisco sounds cool. Let's go. So I went out there for a week to sort of get a feel for the place. I was like, yeah, this is where I'm going to live next. So I moved over there. I lived in San Francisco for I think about 6 months. Then I moved to Oakland.
Right.
I lived in Oakland for about 3 years.
Cool.
So yeah, that time I was still a developer.
Yeah.
I was the only developer working on LGTM in America.
Which now makes sense, knowing it's, you know, a spin out from a British university.
Right. Yeah. And you quickly realize that when you're on the other side of the planet, time zones make it very difficult to have quite the same review cycle as you're maybe used to being in the same time zone as someone. Yeah. It's like, oh, I have a thing. I'll ping someone to review it. It's great. They can send it back. Now it became, I want something reviewed. I have to wait until tomorrow.
Right.
And then I address the comments, and then I wait until the next day. And the same, like, when I'm reviewing other people's work, it's like they won't get a review until that evening, and then they'll only see it the next day.
Right.
Sometimes I would try and get a review like first thing in the morning, so there's maybe a couple of hours of overlap that they could address things. But then
that relies on like lots of things coming together at the right time.
It does. And I was like, you know, this is really tiring. I'm not enjoying this anymore. There was also a similar time at the company when we were realizing that we need some kind of marketing for LGTM. We are basically like 90% of our company were developers at the time, and we had we had a really cool product, but very few people that knew about it. People that knew about it were high-tech companies that were, or small teams within high-tech companies that were using it, and academics. The rest of the people in the high-tech companies had no idea, and anyone who was outside of the high-tech company had no idea who we were. And for a bit of extra context, what Semel was doing at the time, and I guess what we still do even now as part of GitHub, provide a technology that allowed you to find problems in code by like searching things like, find me places where user input flows to a SQL query string and show me the path through the code. And you could define what any of that looked like, and it would show you.
Yeah, it's super cool.
It was
did I
really
see
cool technology.
The GitHub version of that? Something new for GitHub got announced the other day.
It's now called CodeQL.
Yeah.
And they've recently started integrating it directly within something called
Security
Alerts.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's really cool technology, but the use case was still a bit of a hard sell at the time.
Right.
So it was, if the people that we were able to like really convince it was effective were the security response teams at these high-tech companies. You had like MSRC and Microsoft. You have various different security teams at Google, and they were like, yes, this tool is exactly what we need to be able to find problems. Like if someone like finds a vulnerability, you can say, this is what the vulnerability looks like. Is it anywhere else in my code? And I'm like, yes, it's here, 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 and here.
Yeah. So
it was, it's a very, very powerful tool, but no one knew about it. So we need to solve that problem. So Uga decided that we needed a bit of a marketing presence. He came to me and he offered me a change of role to become the company's first developer advocate.
Right.
And at the same time, one of my coworkers who was, I can't remember if he was doing sales or sales strategy, but he ended up becoming head of marketing, and we were working very, very closely together. We were basically the marketing team. So we had lots and lots and lots of calls, and my work completely changed. It was the first time I had to think about time management. I'd never had to do that before. Like before, it was like, I have a thing I'm building, I have a ticket I'm working on. I work on that until it's done. Once it's done, I move to the next thing. Every so often, they'll be reviewing other people's code, but no time management. Now, like switching to this completely different workflow, I'm learning from scratch. I've had no training about developer advocacy. I'm completely...
And that was the context under which we met. Someone had introduced us to talk about DevRel, because this was about the same... I was in San Francisco that year.
Yes.
Obviously doing DevRel at GitHub.
It was MLH, I think, actually. Someone from MLH introduced us.
Yeah, that would make sense. I can't
remember. That
makes sense.
So
I was trying to look it up, but Twitter won't let me scroll back that far in our DMs at the moment. But yeah,
it was MLH.
Cool.
So at the time I was thinking, okay, who do I know that has experience with developer advocacy? And like the first thing that sprung to mind was SendGrid.
Right.
Because I remember distinctly I was at a hackathon that I was mentoring at in Oxford. So if it isn't evident by now, there's a theme throughout my career around education. Like I love education. When I was at uni, I put together and ran a Learn to Code course that I think there's still a form of it being run now by the Computer Society. I tutored when I was at school. I taught at this autistic school for Yale's LBS Oxford for anyone who's interested. Really, really cool facility. I then, I'm while I'm at Semel, I'm invited to mentor a hackathon that's happening.
Right.
So I go there and I love it. I get so much fulfillment out of helping people solve problems.
Yeah.
And I remember speaking to one of the developer advocates at SendGrid, and I'd never heard of developer advocacy before, but I remember speaking to them, and he was talking about the strategy that they had that really made SendGrid special. And the revelation they had was, no one's really using our API yet. What can we do to make them use our API? And they got a developer advocate to think, what if we built client libraries in each of the popular programming languages that actually, mean that you don't have to create your own REST API client to do it. You just use our library and you can just, get on with it.
So I'm
And
chat. Blob Brendan, there are 12 very nice people in the chat. So for context, we've got 2 people from the Pterodactyl stream that have just turned up, and this is a very different vibe to the Pterodactyl stream. During the Pterodactyl stream, Pterodactyl, which is a great open source project, decided to mention their whole Discord server. And so normally we average between like 15 and 20 people in the stream. They brought us 250 people that day, and I exploded. So thank you very much, Blob Brendan. I appreciate you being here, but I like chat at this velocity. It's much easier to read.
It's more intimate. It's manageable. Right, you can moderate that speed.
Right. I'm guessing by the 1.0 release, Blob Brendan, you mean Pterodactyl. This isn't a Pterodactyl stream. Pterodactyl were a guest on our stream. They came to chat about their open source project. And we have other guests on throughout the time. So the reason there's not as many guests as Pterodactyl is because they're not atting their Discord server every day. So yeah, go ahead.
So they were talking about the strategy of creating these client libraries.
Right.
That the marketing team had never thought about this. Sales team hadn't thought about it. But it was someone who came from a developer background. How can I interact with developers, make client libraries for them to use our service? Yeah. And one of the difficulties they had was proving that it was time well spent. Mm-hmm. So what they ended up doing was putting in each of the libraries, they changed the header. I forgot which header it was. User agent header. Say this is the SendGrid API for Rust. This is the SendGrid API for Java. SendGrid API for JavaScript. And then they had statistics of what was interacting with their API. And they're like, so they knew our numbers are increasing.
They need to talk to, and
So until this point, they knew that they were getting sales. They knew that the numbers were increasing. They had no idea how. When they looked at the statistics, I think it was more than 90% of their traffic was coming from these libraries. Right. And they're like,
we need to
these libraries, these libraries are the reason why we've actually been able to get sales recently. And I was like, okay, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So then when I'm starting in this developer advocacy role, I'm like, okay, who do I speak to? I reached out to MLH, Major League Hacking.
Yeah.
We're like, hey, I'm just starting out as a developer advocate. Can we have a meeting, talk about stuff? Is there anyone that you know that might be able to help me on my way? And they introduced me to you. We had I remember the meal that we had. It was at the Lassie Street restaurant.
Yeah. I recommended that restaurant to someone before COVID, actually, funnily enough.
That restaurant is so special. I lived right around the corner of there originally.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is, what's really special about it is it's part of this foundation, I think, called the Lassie Street Foundation.
I remember you telling me.
Yeah. So there's lots of people that are sort of like helping, who've sort of like hit rock bottom and they need to get a career again. They need to sort of get back on their feet. So they offer room and board and training.
Right.
And all of the tips end up going towards as effectively donations to the restaurant or to the foundation. And they had a bunch of different services. They had like a cafe, they had a laundromat, they had a delivery service. There's all sorts. Really, really cool. But I loved it was, and I loved going there because not only, was it a really cool project that you're supporting, but the food was amazing. It was cheaper than any other restaurant in San Francisco, and the service was by far the best. Oh, and you got a really good view of the Bay Bridge.
Yeah, it was in a good spot.
Yeah, the Bay Bridge, for anyone that lives in San Francisco, quickly becomes your favorite bridge compared to the Golden Gate Bridge, which is...
Your cousin is very upset you didn't take them there.
Well, I moved to Oakland by that time, so...
Yeah, I think that was because it was also right near the GitHub office, which is where I was working.
It was, yeah.
So... developer advocacy at LGTM/Semol, and it wasn't that long after this that the acquisition happened, right? So I'm guessing the marketing worked at some point. I guess that one way to get more attention is to get bought by GitHub, I guess.
Yes. I like to think that I had a big hand in the eventual acquisition. I think it was about 2 years after starting developer advocacy that we ended up getting acquired. And this is interesting because it was also hitting another turning point for me in my career, which is probably going to be maybe one of the last things in my story here before we get to where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
I was reaching a point where I felt like I had lived in America for long enough and I was ready to move to somewhere else. I didn't know where.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'd also reached upon like, you know what? I think I've had enough with SEML. Like, SEML has been amazing. It's got me to this amazing place. I got so much experience.
Right.
Like, the one thing that I found out very quickly is coming out of my degree
Yeah.
and going into a career in a software company, I knew nothing. I learned more in my first year at SEML about like building good software, about
Right.
what it means to be a good software engineer. I learned more in my first year than my entire 3 years at uni.
Right.
And that's down to brilliant mentorship, brilliant peers. So if anyone ever says that you can only be a successful software engineer if you have a university degree, I think that's utter bull. Like, it's just
right.
It's rubbish. I've seen many people come from many different backgrounds as well. What really makes you a good developer is being surrounded by other people that you can learn from each other, and being put in situations where you need to solve problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like with anything, the best way to learn is to make mistakes and solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know a single developer that hasn't accidentally deleted code on production servers. I've definitely done that once or twice on LGTM. We can go into
Part of
those.
the reason I could never be an actual developer. Cannot deal with that anxiety.
It was not one of my better days. It was also a work from home day. And after the incident, I was just told, Sam, just log off, go to sleep. We'll speak to you tomorrow. I was like, okay. I messed up.
Log off. Enduring words to live by.
And this was only like a year and a half into my career.
Right.
So I stayed on for a long time after that. So they obviously didn't, they didn't think badly of me for that.
Yeah.
Like, it's just your time to make that mistake.
I very strongly believe in, and I can't remember where I saw this. It might have been after the GitLab outage, but it's a very commonly quoted thing, which is like, hey, once an engineer has deleted prod, they will never delete prod again. Like the best, like, once you've been for that learning experience, it's something, you have learned from it and have been through that, and it's not something you're keen to repeat. So, like, why would you fire someone who's made that mistake? They're going to learn from it.
They're going to be better because of it.
Yeah.
Right? Totally. You're going to be better because of it.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about moving on. I was thinking about moving to a different country. I was thinking about moving to a different career. Didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I felt like I wanted to do something with a bit more purpose. And then there were all these rumors happening inside the company, right? It's like something strange is going on. Like this, there are some things that are misplaced.
Yeah.
And one of my questions,
like, familiar with those rumors.
Yeah.
They were all over the shop when Microsoft bought GitHub.
Right. So it was that, but to a lesser extent, right? Because it's a much smaller company, but we still have them, and we're like, and like people were like, I think we're going to get acquired by GitHub and by proxy Microsoft.
By that point,
and then so I'm at this point, I am in the UK for 6 weeks because I have a bunch of conferences that I'm giving talks at as a developer advocate. Something else you learn to do is giving talks at conferences.
Yeah.
And learning how to enjoy travel.
Learning how to enjoy it is a good description of that.
I didn't get that far because I only had the conference circuit for about a year for me.
Right. And so many events happen in the Bay Area that you could probably get away with not traveling, to be fair.
Right, exactly. Like most of the conferences I went to ended up being in the Bay Area, which is one of the reasons why Ugo wanted to actually relocate me there, because he wanted me to do more of that work anyway, even before thinking about the role change.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, I hear about this rumor. I'm like, I'm just going to hold off just for now to see what's going to happen over the next few weeks. The announcement comes. I'm like, I'm going to be a GitHub employee. How do I feel about that? Well, a year ago, when I was thinking about what company would I be happy living in America to work for, GitHub was right at the top of the list. They were doing everything right. They had amazing policies around HR, around diversity. Their engagement with the community was amazing. They had the coolest offices that I'd been to. Big factor. And I'm like, well, if I'm going to be a GitHub now, it doesn't make sense for me to move on and leave SEML and skip out on all the benefits of being an employee there for a while. So um, we get acquired. This is back. I become an official employee. I think was it back in October last year.
That
So about a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I am part of the new team called the Security Lab team. So I helped stand up that site. I helped prepare for the big announcement at GitHub Universe about big security research project we're doing. That's like Project Zero, but by GitHub, and it was really, really cool. And I met some really, really awesome people at GitHub.
Yeah.
But at the back of my mind was like, all right, when is it that I'm going to leave? I know that I'm going to leave. Like it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
So my boss, his boss, all of my team knew that this was going to be happening soon. So we started discussing, okay, how are we going to make this happen? I feel it's time. And this was December. We're talking about this. Like I've been a few months. And I'm like, great, this is great. And I need to start thinking about moving to something else because I was really wanting to get out of the Bay Area. I think you probably understand this as well. Like, there's a certain energy for the Bay Area. It's great to begin with. It's amazing.
I hated every minute of it. Not a Bay Area devotee.
I loved it to begin with. There were definitely lots of benefits for me. Like one thing, I really, really, really miss the redwoods. I miss the nature. I miss the community. I miss the parties. They're some of the best parties I've ever been to there. But there's like so much about like, and eventually like the things I disliked about the Bay Area just overtook the benefits. And like I need to get out now. So then I was like, I'm gonna travel while I think about what I want to do. And bearing in mind this is December last year.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, let's make the plan. So the plan was and GitHub was still trying to say, like, if there's a chance after you're traveling, you want to come back to keep working for us, we want to keep that open.
Yeah.
So you can have, unpaid leave for a couple of months, right, to decide it, and then just let us know at the end if you're coming back or not.
Right.
So end of January, I moved all of my stuff back to my parents in the UK. The shipping container, everything. Closed all my ties to like US bureaucracy, all the utility bills, all of that stuff.
Right.
And then start of February, I spend some time at my parents are like, you're here now, spend a few weeks here before you disappear. I'm like, okay, sounds great. So I'm home for a few weeks. I then spend a few days in Germany with some friends there, and then I go to Italy. Late February, early March, I go to Italy. So I'm traveling around Italy. Meanwhile, the COVID.
I'm just going to post links to the news from the time in the chat.
At the time, I was slowly winding my way down Italy, and COVID was following me.
Great.
Like, okay, this region is now locked down. This region is now locked down. I'm like, I was planning on traveling for a couple of months here. I was planning on literally traveling all around Europe. I'm like, I just need to. I can't do that anymore. I need to go home.
Right.
So I packed my bags, drove all the way through Italy in one fell swoop, not stopping at all. The Germany, got the train all the way back to the UK, and sitting at home like, I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be having time off work.
Right.
I'm technically not working right now. And now I'm in quarantine, and I want to do something about the quarantine. So I found this project that's now called Reach for Help. It was part of this initiative called, what was it? Helpful Engineering. It's a group of a few thousand people, like engineers, software engineers, chemists, physicists, anyone was sort of like technically minded that wanted to come up with solutions to COVID, but wasn't part of a company that was equipped to do that. Like, I have skills, I want to do something about it. So there were like dozens of projects that sprouted off. One of them, reachforhelp.org. I became.
I was just looking for.
Just about to paste the link.
Yep, there you go.
So I was working. I was effectively volunteering full time on this project. And I loved it, and it was really good. But also, I was thinking about more long term, like what is the impact I want to have long term? And I found a job posting for this particular organization that I will actually leave nameless because I'm not technically allowed to speak on behalf of them as a contractor.
That makes sense.
But if you're curious, you can look at my GitHub profile and very easily work out who they are. Because there is some open source repos.
Which I will
It'll paste.
There you go.
And it was the software that I'd be working on was effectively the software that all of the humanitarian organizations use to coordinate, plan and coordinate the humanitarian response to crises across the world. And I was like, this is awesome. I'm going to apply. So I applied, wound down my work with Reach for Help, and started working full time. I think it was back in May.
Cool.
So
don't mind me.
Don't mind you. I see the comment there. So it's been amazing. Like it's definitely a very, very different environment to the tech industry.
I can only imagine, yeah.
But it is very, very rewarding working on a project that, I'm not just building software for the sake of building software now. Like I'm building software that has a very, very, very short path to real impact and helping people. So yeah, it's really cool.
Team look like? So you said you're a contractor. Do they have in-house developers, or is it all contracted teams?
No, so this particular organization, and I feel it's probably common across most of the public sector and most of the NGO sector.
Right.
No, they're all of the developers are contracted. We have a tech lead on our team. That's the first point at which you reach staff within the organization. And but other than that, it's just the same as any other team. Like all the contractors are full time. Yeah. We are each other's co-workers. Like we're all independent contractors. So we got on stand-ups. We have a Jira board that we share.
Yeah.
We have all the usual like software development processes that you get for any team.
Right.
It's just slightly different.
Yeah.
Right. There's like some detachment from the organization. We don't have quite as much visibility into the organization, into the hierarchy, into the processes as you might get as an employee.
Is probably helpful. I imagine. Having an insight into that organization of that scale is probably distracting. It'll probably be distracting. We're somewhat shielded from some of the bureaucracy that you would get at a company or an organization that scale. But it is, it's otherwise it's just like any other tech company, albeit more resource constrained than you'd find in the tech world, right? With any NGO or any public sector organization, right? They have maybe a greater need for software to fulfill certain purposes than tech companies, or tech companies are, chasing capital. That's kind of, and that's also why they have all the resources. Right.
But in the NGO sector, in the public sector, a lot more resource constrained, and also there's quite often a lot less experience in decision makers higher up about things like procurement, right? There's this consulting firm that has bidded to provide us or build us the thing that we need for this much money. We don't even need to think about it. We'll just have them do it. Right. But there are a lot of downsides to that, and increasingly more and more NGOs, public sector organizations are pulling more of the control internally, which I think is a really, really good thing. It's I believe overall going to save them a lot more money and get them more of what they want. The difficulty, of course, is like how do you get to that point? Because if you're just you're a charity out there in the blue, you need some software built for you. You don't know anyone in the industry,
right?
Until you've been exposed to them.
Specify those requirements,
right?
The hiring process, all manner of stuff.
Right. You need people with experience, which is quite often they get consultants first, and then people from the consultancy end up being cherry picked.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I also like when I was very briefly working with wildlife NGOs, ran into a couple of like consulting orgs that like specialize in that sector, basically, who would like only work with wildlife consulting NGOs. Wildlife conservation NGOs, and were all kind of people who brought together that experience. And like, hey, we're industrial software engineers, but we recognize the context with which the NGOs are coming from, and I imagine that's the same at like all different areas and sectors of NGO land.
Yeah, I think that there's probably a lot more. They maybe use more consultants that are more general than they probably should.
Right.
But there's just, I think there's a lack of consultancy firms that are highly specialized.
Right.
There are some, and I think every time, I think all of those are definitely a lot more valuable because they bring, they're able to empathize with the need a lot better. And you probably hear this a lot as a developer advocate. Like, empathy is such an important aspect of software development. You need to understand your users. You need to understand what they think, what they need to be able to build stuff effectively for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm trying not to say the name for you, but an organization with humanitarian in the name. Empathy is probably a high requirement.
Probably a high requirement. Yeah.
So I am conscious of the time.
Yeah, we've been talking a while.
Do you want to jump on to synesthesia?
Sure.
So I guess to set the context of from jumping on from complete gear change from that to synesthesia, do you want to talk a little bit about what this project is and where it came from?
Yeah. So many years ago, I was at Semmel. I bought an LED light strip at home, and I made pretty patterns with it. I was like, this is cool, this is fun.
Right.
Shortly after that, I had a friend come over like, oh, you should make that synchronize with music. I was like, that's an interesting idea. So I started playing around with a couple of things. I just did something as simple as making it pulse at the right BPM for a particular song. And I'd press play on my music player, it would trigger an event that would then trigger the flashing, and it was on time.
Right.
And what I realized was it's a lot more the contrast of having light reflecting only one instrument compared to, you normally have the full visual spectrum with visualizers.
Sure.
You're trying to capture all of the audio and make a visualization out of it. Having just a single bit, a single layer of the audio being isolated and visualized, that was very, very powerful and really cool. I'm like, ooh, I could turn this into something big. I could have these lights do things with the drums, these lights do things with the vocals, these lights do things with the various tone instruments. I'm like this, and it would look way cooler than all of the other visualizations I've seen before. So that's where the idea started.
Cool.
And I didn't actually start working on it until after I moved to San Francisco and gave a talk at Noisebridge. If you YouTube Sam Lanning Noisebridge,
the website.
Yeah. And I was like, I gave a talk this is something I want to build. This is how it will work, right? You'll have a cue file that describes all the different events that happen during a song, where all the drums are hit, where all the cues are hit, all the tones, everything. And then you would have some software that would synchronize that with the playback of a song, and then that could then control lighting in a theater. It could control all these sorts of things. So that was the idea. Like a lot of hobby projects, I have spent much less time working on it than I would have liked. So it's been one of those things that it's now 4 years old, I think.
Right.
So I can every few weekends, I'm I'm going to spend a bit of time with synesthesia, and I spend a bit of time with synesthesia. I add one feature, or I do one bit of refactoring, and then I don't touch it again for weeks because I'm just too exhausted from work and I need my weekends.
Right.
So that's kind of the history.
Yeah.
So I can dive into it.
Let's do it. I was just watching the demo video from the one with the giant hexagons.
Oh yeah. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So that's in a space in Berkeley called Lumen Labs. So their entire space is controllable with a protocol called DMX, which is the standard light control protocol for stages and stuff. And you can just connect to their Wi-Fi network and control all the lights in the space. So like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm definitely going to use this as a canvas to play around with.
Nice. That's the second video on that link I sent for anyone who wants to check that out. Synethesiaproject.org. The second demo video is that one.
Totally. So you can see it. Actually, I'll zoom in a bit.
Cool. If anyone in the chat can't see, let us know.
So yeah, like any software project, it's got not any, but many. It's got a repository on GitHub.
Right.
And if we actually, one of the things that would be probably quite interesting to see would be the contributing graph. So you can see you can see the sporadic nature of my developing. Like I have three contributors: Dependabot, Azure Pipelines,
and you. Yeah.
and me. Like one of the reasons that I wanted to sort of why I thought about talking about this project in particular, as well as being very close to my heart, is given that the age of the project, my opinion about how I want to do software has changed so many times over the lifetime of the software. Like the majority of the contributions the majority of the work that I've done have mostly been, I want to do things this way now. I'm going to refactor it this way. I'm going to refactor it this way. Like at one point it was one big repo, then I like pulled it out into different repositories, and then I realized how mono repos were very useful, and then I started pulling it back into a mono repo, firstly as like Yarn workspaces, and then I switched over to using Rush. At the beginning I was using Grunt for the first component, then I switched to Gulp, and then I've been using Gulp ever since. There's lots of technological changes. But what's probably been the most useful thing about this project that's provided me was it was a playground for technology. So it was the first project I ever used with React.
Right.
And as a result of playing around with React, because we were using TypeScript in LGTM's front end at the same time, and something called Polymer, which I don't know if you've heard about that, hasn't
design system.
It's related to that. So it's kind of like it goes hand in hand with the new web components protocols or the web component specs.
I see. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I didn't.
And I was like, this is cool. This is new. This is from Google. I'm sure it's going to work well. So we started using it for LGTM. We were bought in. We were building something with it.
Right.
And then once we, there were some elements about it, some properties that were a little bit painful. And then I was playing with React on this project, and I was like, this is so much nicer to use, right? Especially as we were using TypeScript at the time, which has, as a software quality company, we care a lot about we're static analysis. Basically, we care about anyone that works at a static analysis company. Like, you have to write software using a type system, using statically typed languages, because it just solves so many problems for you. So we were using TypeScript, which was statically typed JavaScript.
Right.
But the boundaries, the Polymer had so many boundaries that you jumped between that you ended up losing type safety. Like you had to write HTML, but there was no checking to make sure that the HTML was referring to things in JavaScript correctly, that the JavaScript was referencing things in HTML correctly, and it was just unsafe. There was also two-way data binding, which is something that I'm very opposed to now. But I was using React, and TypeScript had first-class support for React, and I was making far fewer mistakes. I was writing code way faster, prototyping way faster. I'm like, this is amazing. I went back to my team, and I was like, I think we should switch to React. And they were like, you were the one that said we should do Polymer. Why are you now saying we should use React?
Well, there's a new shiny thing. Yeah,
it's a new shiny thing.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it wasn't a new shiny thing. It's been around for a few years, and it was actually the industry standard at that point.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest lesson I learned there was, don't use a new technology for enterprise software. Right. Use something that's proven. Use something that has a few years of age of maturity behind it. So anyway, with all that context,
so where do we dive in? Where's the start?
I think we start at the first component that I built.
Okay.
Go back as far as possible, and so this is it. So the first component I built was this thing called a composer, which was basically going to be, you load a song file into the browser, and then you could say, okay, these are where my drum beats are. These are where these things are. And you could press the space bar and move the things and have some playback. So right away, I was trying to figure out, and this is how long I haven't touched this for, So I was looking at like, okay, what have we got in the source tree? We got a HTML file here and a HTML file here. Like, okay, this HTML, because I wanted to know where the entry point it was for the project. Like, what is the script that runs first?
Right.
I'm like, okay, so it's obviously bundle.js here. Like, where does that come from? Like, it's obviously part of this build. So I looked into my gulp file. I see, where is it? Oh, bundle here. Okay, it's defined in Webpack. So there's a Webpack and it builds main. So like, okay, main is the file that is used, which is an uncommon name. So I go into my scripts. I go into my TypeScript file. I spent about 10 minutes doing this before our call today. Like, I cannot find main anywhere.
I thought we hear that from everyone who I give this terrible activity to. They're like, I had to look at my project for hours.
Like, what did I do? How does this work? And then I realized, there's a JavaScript file.
Right.
With main.js, and main.js loads component stage where it loads from here. Perfect. I'm like, oh, okay. So for whatever reason, I thought it was necessary to have a JavaScript file just for starting the project, even though
I guess that works. That makes sense.
It works, but it's unnecessary because I could just written main.ts and it gets compiled to JavaScript anyway. Right. So I don't know.
Right. Really quick random tangent. Unified setup is your repo for your dot files, right?
Oh yeah.
Cool, awesome. Sorry, Hugh Rawlinson in the chat was asking. He likes your window manager setup.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So if you wanna clone my setup, then you can clone that repo. No promises that it works because every time I get a new laptop or do a new reinstall, I try it and there's something that's broken. But
I'm sure he'll
that's kind of how it is.
And integrate it into his. Okay. So I mean, to me, a main.js as an entry point for a program, even if it's just calling out to something else, that makes sense.
There's not too much risk of There's not too much type on safety gear going. Like if it's not going to work, it's not going to work very very quickly, and it's not going to work in one very specific way. So it's like cool. Not too bad. And then if we look at, so I got something called styling here. It's like, great, I'm using styled components. Cool. So this was I'm actually going to talk a little bit about some other mistakes that I made, or some other decisions I made that I changed my opinion about. Originally, when I was using React, I'm like, React is cool, but I really, really like shadow DOMs. And shadow DOMs were this funky new thing, again, new thing in web components that weren't really fleshed out yet.
Right.
Because what it did, it provides styling isolation. So you can be like, okay, I'm going to style this component, but I'm going to put whatever CSS I want, whatever, and it will only affect this component. And I thought that's cool. So I ended up combining shadow DOM with React in some way to get style to style my components. And
interesting.
It caused way more problems than it solved. And then I came across styled components.
Right, which
is amazing. Right, you can just write all of your styles in the same file as your components.
Right. And
the one thing that I've definitely become a big proponent of, especially, I mean, this is kind of evident as if you're using React, like your HTML and your script, your logic is all in the same file, right? Mm-hmm. And then what you end up doing if you're using some certain libraries is you're using Sass and you have .scss files next to your component files, but then for every single component you have two files that have the same name. That sometimes they'll get it wrong and they won't be in the same location. And you need to import it from somewhere else. It's just so much better. Like when you do separation of concerns based on like the component and what it's doing rather than the technology it's using, I find it's way more effective. Yeah. So having all of the styling in the same file as the HTML and the logic for a particular component.
Yeah.
I'm like super support that.
It's come up a couple of times in a couple of shows now where like I've been looking at Svelte recently. We had someone come on talk about Vue and we were talking about with Nathaniel earlier where it's like I don't this is probably the same for you, but like the entire time I've been learning computing has been like very much like, hey, separate, is that you said, like separate by technology, and now it seems like we've just like decided to unroll all of that, which has been really fascinating.
I think it's so much better. Yeah. But let's have a look at
I'm sure we'll all go back to the other way in a couple of years.
I'm sure. So, okay, the first thing I noticed here, which I expected,
Yeah.
was use of a classical component here. So
Right.
I have a class that's a React component rather than a like pure functional component.
Right.
Look at all of this boilerplate. Look at all this. I have to set the state here.
Right. I've still managed to avoid React, so I still have I have no idea what's going on. But I'm sure most of our viewers who are not as behind the times as me. But so that's a good. So if you were to do this again today, what would you do to avoid this boilerplate situation?
So I mean, one of the reasons is like this is because React wasn't as nice.
Right.
It wasn't as easy to use functional components, or they weren't as useful as class components. But now we've got hooks, we've got state hooks, all of that sort of thing. So I would definitely, well, I'm building a React app right now as part of my work, and it's all hooks, it's all all functional components, and the code it just produces is much cleaner. Nice. So I'm like, so let's have I know we're running out of time, so I want to criticize my code a bit more. Let's see. Oh yeah, look at this. Magic strings.
Okay, what are magic strings?
So magic strings. Have you heard of the term magic numbers? No. So the basic
same
idea.
String for a different type.
Yeah, it's the same concept. Yeah. The basic idea is like if sometimes you might have some code or some logic, and it might say some mathematical logic like divide by 3,600, which is the number of seconds in an hour or something. And somewhere else in the code, you might also have like 3,600, and it's like, well, right now we're duplicating stuff, duplicating particular values.
Okay, I see where you're going with magic numbers. Okay.
And like another good case for strings is paths, right? Where you have, you might reference a file in a folder in one way by having the full path as a string, and then later on you reference it in the same way. It's like, but what if you need to change that path? You move the folder. You need to remember to change it in all the places. So a much better strategy is to pull it out as a constant and then reference that constant. And then if you're using something like TypeScript as well, and also, I mean, JavaScript or other languages, if you've got good linting, is you can't reference a variable incorrectly, right? You could reference the wrong variable if it's also something that exists. But if you want to change the name of the variable, then you will know until you fix all the problems. If you need to change the name of the path, you change it in one place.
So I think I realized my confusion here, which was I didn't realize. So are you telling me that all of this CSS we're currently looking at is in a string?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
well,
that was what I was missing. There we go. Why is that in a string?
That's commonplace. So it's using something called a template string here. So the idea is the way
that whole style block. That's a common practice somewhere. I am behind, folks. I've missed some terrors.
They are not usually this big, which is another criticism I have of myself here. So I was still very much in the CSS way of doing things as a mindset. So I would create like CSS files inside of my JavaScript, and I would reference things with classes like this. And what I would do differently, the first thing I would do differently is I wouldn't use these classes directly here, because what if I had a typo in one of them, or what if I referenced what if I typed it wrong in my HTML? I would instead pull out the class name as a constant. I usually have an object called class CLS in all caps that has all of the classes I need as strings. And then I reference that, which means that I'm never writing a magic string anywhere.
Right, that makes sense.
The other thing...
Hugh Rawlinson is having fun with me being horrified by template strings in the chat. I think I did template strings in a execute program, Hugh. But obviously, like in the context with which I recently covered, template strings was not entire style sheet in a template string.
So my other criticism is that this is way too big of a template string.
Right. That's what I honestly didn't realize for the longest time it was a string until we got into it. Okay.
And what I would actually do differently, like what I've been doing a lot more of is actually pulling out individual components. Like this is the component for this location, and style just that component. This is the component. So you can do something like you could do instead of here where I've got class name equals zoom, I could do const zoom div equals styled dot div, and then put all of my styling in there, and then use this component instead of div, and then that also means you don't need to give any class name at all. You just need to give it a variable name, which is much safer.
Cool.
You still sometimes need to use class names, for example, state, like if you have a menu that's either open or closed,
right,
and you need to have like a class for that. And in those cases, I would definitely use a string constant rather than a magic string.
Cool.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, wonderful.
How much further can we go? Because we're out of time now, aren't we? Basically,
we are very close to time. Which my only concern for that is just purely the fact that it's late for us. But I'm happy to go. We've got time. Like, keep going.
Yeah.
As long as you're good. As long as you're good to keep going, I'm good.
As long as you're good, I'll keep going as well. All right. So I don't really have any idea what to expect here.
Yeah.
Another thing I'm noticing at the moment is I'm not really using any state management. Mm-hmm. So one thing early on when I was using React, I was like, I don't see the point of Redux. Right, sure. Just put all of the state in the root component. It's fine. There's no problem.
Right. And the Redux has been explained to me on our show before. We're gonna start a spin-off of this show, which is people who do the web in 2020 explain to Joe why he should care about React. But for now, that one I do know. Okay.
But who knows? People who do web in 2020 but have the context of how they did the web when you were doing the web.
Yeah.
Like, things are different.
Yeah. It's also I would be more willing to learn it if there weren't so many build tools involved. Anyway, so Redux.
I gave it's a quick segue. I gave a talk O'Reilly about how TypeScript has taken over the JavaScript ecosystem.
Right.
And for this talk, I was like, I want to get some numbers for how many packages of each language there are.
Yeah.
And it's probably no shock to you here. NPM had over, was it 1 million or 10 million? Mm-hmm. It was 5 times, I think it was 5 times or 3 times the next biggest one, which was Python.
Right.
And it was just, if you look at the trajectory over time of how many packages, it's like, whoop.
Yeah. Which makes
it makes it because the easiest to publish. You just write some code and then publish.
JavaScript has a special place in the ecosystem, right? Where it's you have to use it to do web stuff, I guess.
Right.
While we're on this question, Hugh did ask a question that I completely glossed over in my horror about strings. Hugh asked, I've completely lost it. How do you like Rush, and do you think it will see wide adoption?
So Rush is really cool. There's definitely some controversy surrounding it as a project. There was another monorepo project that it was sort of thought of that Rush kind of ripped off.
Okay.
But that's kind of interesting to look at. Open source politics is always one of those kind of interesting things that is kind of interesting to watch from the sidelines.
Rip off an open source project.
Yeah, and get away with it, and because Rush is built by Microsoft, there's more that they can get away with.
Okay.
But I think Rush is really cool. What I like about Rush is it's very, very strict about what you're allowed to do. It's like, okay, if you're creating packages, you can set up they all need to be using the same version of all their dependencies. You can't have one package in the monorepo that's using this version of a dependency and another one using a different. No, they're all using the same.
Okay.
The other thing I like about it is its first-class support for PNPM, PNPM, which is, because
one, right?
I just say there aren't enough tools, there aren't enough package managers to manage installing your JavaScript dependencies. But PNPM is really cool because that installs dependencies a little differently. It prevents ghost dependencies. Like if you want to import a dependency, it's not enough for one of your dependencies to have that as its dependency. You need to be explicit and want it yourself. So, it's really, again, it's very strict. So what I like about Rush, I like about PNPM is they're very strict about what you're allowed to do.
Right.
Which generally means that you're going to make better quality software. Like, you are not allowed to publish. You can't build your code unless your dependencies look tidy you're doing all of these things right. You're doing all of these things right. So I think that is very, very useful.
Cool.
There are also like some other monorepo tools sort of hitting it big at the moment.
Like Yarn workspaces, which you mentioned.
So Yarn works, but that was one of the first ones. But you've got stuff like NX. I think it's NX.js. So I'm using that in one of my projects, which is, my parents are talking in the background here.
Sorry, Sam's parents.
It does things again in a bit of an interesting way. That does it more of like a Google way, where rather than having packages that it's by a company called Narwhal, I think.
Okay.
It's like, okay, if you want to build a JavaScript package, use this plugin that builds JavaScript packages. You can't like run your own build command that runs these things, that runs gulp, that does all this. It's like, no, you put your things in these places and you build your project in this way. And that's something like I'm having some growing pains getting used to it, because it's I'm just venturing into it at the moment. But I also really like what they're doing, and they have first-class support for like Next.js and Angular and React and all these sorts of things. So that's it's really, really cool. So if you're thinking about going the monorepo way, I'm not sure whether Rush or NX is the better way for you to go, or even Yarn workspaces. Really kind of give them a go. NX seems to have the biggest community surrounding it, I think, at the moment.
But then if Rush is sponsored by Microsoft, that has the potential to flip-flop, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to that. I think with a lot of Microsoft projects, right, they keep maybe a little bit of a tighter control of the direction. They obviously take a lot of input. Like TypeScript is, a fantastic example of a very well-run open source Microsoft project.
Right.
But because there's such a massive community around it, it can't really be community-led.
Right.
Right. They need to keep a much tighter control over the direction, about which features they're in, all of that sort of stuff. So, so there's pros and cons to it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. I hope that answers your question, Hugh. Rad. So I guess let's try and find one more thing that you would do substantially different today. What else is on your mind?
Okay, let's see. Now, we've only looked at one component here. So this is the front-end component for the... I need that. Front-end component for component stuff. But there's like, over the years, I've got many different components that all sort of communicate with one another.
Right.
So another one is this server here, which is kind of the place where you tell it, hey, I'm now playing this song.
Right.
And it's like, great, let me find a key file for that. Oh, here it is. Let me tell all the people that are listening that you're now playing the song at this time, and here's the track for them to play. So that's kind of the job of this server. So this is a backend project, basically. It's an NPM project.
Nice.
So I don't know. Let's see. We've got a lot of things going on here. Storage. Let's have a look at this. Is this anything interesting? Oh, I know what to search for. I know what I probably haven't done in this project.
So SQ is like the file for specifying, as you would like tend about the composer, really, like basically it's the output of the composer where you put in like you've got the track and you put in where you want the actions to be. Cool. Awesome.
Yes, like at this timestamp relative to the start of the song, this happens. This timestamp, this happens. This timestamp, this happens. Cool. I could actually give maybe a little. I could try and do the risky thing. We know never to do this when giving talks. I could try and do a demo.
Go for it. Yeah, absolutely. Do it again. This will bring us into like another segment we want to start doing on a show is Will It Build, where we just choose a random old project and try and build it.
The answer is almost certainly going to be no every time.
Right.
Okay, I don't think it has that. So it looks like I was trying to see if I had in TypeScript, there's this concept of type guards. So you can be like, you can create a function that will return true if the value you give it is of a certain type. And what that will allow you to do is later on in the function, if you call that function somewhere, TypeScript will know that it is of that type. So you can do you can access it in that way.
Mhm.
So one of the way that I do that is like if I have configuration files in a JSON file, I want to load it in, but before I start using the config file, I want to make sure that it is correctly formatted, because I might use it somewhere completely different in my code base and pass it over. And that entire way through, it's like, yeah, this is of the config type. Yeah, this is of the config type. Yeah, this is of the config type. But at the point at which I read the file, if it hasn't validated that that's the case, there might be a type error caused way on like down the chain.
Sure.
So I thought I had something that stores stuff in storage. I guess navigating around a code base, having a while. The storage. What is it storing?
This is an interesting skill in itself. Like, this is why I found. That's why I was very why I was a big fan of that main file that you didn't like earlier, because like it's the sort of thing where when you look back in years later, like even if it just links to another file, it's like, oh, main. Obviously, I know what to look for there. Whereas like when you've got some entry file that's named about some abstraction of project, like I think that one was stage or something like that. Like you're never going to find that after like 5 years, right? Like
totally. Your the naming conventions you use definitely change over time as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, here I'm storing. It looks like I'm storing a file.
Right.
And do I get a file? Get file. Right. Track ID. Right. So here, this.
A classic JSON parse file to string.
That looks very dangerous to me. So right now I'm reading a file here from the file system that, you know, if it's not JSON, that's fine. I'll throw an error. Great. That's what it should do. But it's saying like the return type of this function is, oh, this is a Q file. And if I jump into Q file, you can see the definition. Okay, it's an object with this value. With these properties, this one's an array of these, which is yet another type and yet another type. So it's a complicated built-up type that says this is how a Q file looks.
Mm-hmm.
But if I look at this, where was I? I look here, there's no validation that happens.
Right.
So synesthesia, the server just assumes it is correctly formatted, and there could be something wrong with it.
Yeah.
For example, one of the things that's quite likely to happen is I'm playing around with it. I've got some files on my hard drive, and then I change the format of the type because it's actively developing. Q files now need to have this property,
right?
And if they haven't, they're invalid. But there's nothing here catching that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I would definitely change. I actually, before even seeing this, I assumed that I would have some sort of check, like manual check.
Yeah.
Because what I was hoping to say is like, oh look, I've got a manual check here. I could actually use this library.
Yeah.
But actually, I haven't got any check at all, which is even even worse. There's nothing that's protecting my software from a bad JSON file here. So that could throw an error anywhere else in my code, which is not great.
Cool.
So the way I would solve this is there's a really cool library called IOTS.
Okay.
Which you can find a link for as well.
Yeah, I'll grab that for you.
But this library is really, really cool. So one of the things that, somewhat frustrating if you're dealing with data that you get to like from a user or you store on disk, or basically it leaves the program in any way.
Right.
And you need to validate is of a certain type when you consume it again.
Mm-hmm.
Quite often you need to define what the type is and the validation separately, which means, you're duplicating code. Okay. What this project does, it's really, really cool. It uses some TypeScript trickery to allow you to define the types and the validation all in one go. Which means it gets rid of all the code duplication. It also means that you're not accidentally going to remember to update the type, but forget to update the validator or vice versa. It's always going to be in sync, which means that if it validates, it is of that type, which is a really, really, really powerful thing. So I've started using this this library.
Super cool.
Yeah, I use this library whenever I have a TypeScript project where data is leaving or being consumed by it. Even when I'm interacting with REST APIs, I will first create a IOTS type to validate the data that I get back from the API to make sure that they're not making a problem. They're not sending data that's invalid according to their own spec.
Right. I think I did post that in chat. Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, that looks super great.
Yeah.
Also, I have now bounced onto his other module FPTS, which
Oh yeah, functional programming
I'm
TS.
I'm
As a computer scientist, I'm sure you'll
I'm
like it.
very into this. I'll be exploring this again. Awesome, cool. Yeah, I think that was a really great one to jump on. And again, it kind of goes back to that point you first made that like when you're one of the difficult things of I mean you get this in every language, like for example like Rust and Haskell, you will fall down to these APIs that are like clearly marked with unsafe, and like when you're using TypeScript there are just so many temptations everywhere in the ecosystem and everywhere in like what you have access to, which is just like cool, I've just like I spent all this time making all these types to make this safe and I've just kicked out the window by reading an unsafe file without even like
Right.
bothering to check it.
Yeah.
So I think that really that last point really connected back to what you were saying when you were first talking about your method, your reason for wanting to use TypeScript. Super cool.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Right. It's you want to make sure that the data that you're writing code for
Right.
is of the data the code expects. Right.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Simple as that.
Cool. Well, we're gonna have to call it time now, otherwise I will miss our streams tomorrow because I'll be asleep. So we're gonna have to have you back at some point to finish going for this and to get that demo.
Oh yeah.
But for now, if folks want to reach you anywhere, ask you any questions. There was one question from Hugh. What is Rush's equivalent of where's it gone? Yarn run dev.
The answer to that is you need to make your own custom command, I think. So Rush has a JSON file where you define for this, well, I want to be able to say rush this or rush this.
Right.
There isn't a default thing that allows you to just run scripts in your package JSON.
Sure.
You need to create, okay, this is how I'm going to create a command that allows me to run my dev server. I'm going to create a command that allows me to do all my linting, that sort of thing. And you say, okay, this runs this script in the package JSON files of all of my repositories. This runs this script, and it is required that every package has it, or it's optional, that sort of thing. So you will define that in a JSON file for Rush.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question. Hugh, let us know how you get on with that. I actually don't see him in the chat anymore, so we might have lost him. Anyway, he can watch the recording. So yeah, if people want to get in touch with you and ask you any questions, where's the best place for them to go? I know you're social media now, so I guess your GitHub. Yeah,
so go to my GitHub. My email address is public there, so you can look at that. Brilliant. Also, if you're interested in doing something fancy on your GitHub profile, I recently figured out how to do animated SVG files, and I have a header image. It's an animated SVG.
I did see that. I didn't realize it was animated though. I thought
it's very subtle. So
like
feel free to poke around there, definitely. And actually, if you look at my website, it's even worse.
Where's the animation?
You see the little ripples? Yeah, it's subtle. If you go to my website, which is also linked to on my GitHub, it has mass interactivity as well. It's all like one massive SVG that just uses your whole screen. I went a bit crazy. I was like, I want something out there. But yeah, my email address is on my GitHub profile. You can email me. You can find a project of mine that you disagree with how I've done something, leave an issue or whatever.
Nice. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being with us. And so once we get our post-Hacktober schedule, we will have to book another episode to get the second half of Synethesia. But thank you for telling us all your story and all the various weaving for it. I will now free you to the internet and move you backstage to do our outro. Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks. Bye. Awesome. Thank you so much again, Sam. Thank you to all the viewers, people hanging out with us today. Don't go anywhere. Let me tell you about our last two shows. I can't believe it's over already. I can't believe we've gone through 62 shows, something ludicrous. 80 hours we're going to hit before the end of the week, but still two more to go, and those last two are up on our schedule site, twitch.tv Raise Dev's schedule. Those shows are with Eddie. So our first show tomorrow, 3 p.m. UTC, is with Eddie. Eddie's an open source advocate, does great instructional content on YouTube and on Twitch. Has been working really hard to help people come into open source. He's been very busy during Hacktoberfest. We spoke to Eddie on one of our first shows of the month, and now we're catching back up with him to do a little bit of reflection and rewinding on what's happened during this Hacktoberfest. Before that, actually, I just remembered, we will be on, I say me, the Vonage folks are doing their last Hacktoberfest show at, I believe, 12? p.m. UTC tomorrow. Matt's in the chat. Matt will tell me. I've got it in my calendar as well. Let me pull that up. 2 p.m. UTC. Thank you, Matt. 2 p.m. UTC is the last Vonage show over on twitch.tv, Vonage Devs. A bunch of us who have, lurking in the Hacktoberfest Discord will be on that show speaking about our favourite contributions this month. Matt will be there, I hear from Twitter. I'll be there. So 2 p.m. UTC, Vonage Devs will be there. Then 3 p.m. UTC, I'll be back with Eddie on this channel. And then our last show of the day, Matt will be back with us for the third time with Chris Ewald, a developer here at Race.dev, and they'll be talking about the Hacktoberfest app. Chris, who used to maintain it, and Matt, who maintains it then and now, will be doing a little bit of like old maintainer, new maintainer, what would we do differently, what was the context of which this app was made, what would we do differently in the future kind of situation, which is going to be a wonderful way for us to end our Hacktoberfest here on the show. And as I just said to Sam, we will be still streaming after Hacktoberfest. We don't know our schedule yet. It will probably be twice a week, but as soon as we know that, we'll put that up on the Twitch page so you can find it. So make sure you follow us. Drop us a follow on hit the little love heart, and hit the bell. Especially you, Sam's cousin. Thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting your cousin. You're a very supportive cousin. You should come back. Hit the love heart, hit the bell to get notifications about our new schedule when that's set. You can also follow us at RaiseDevs, twitter.com/RaiseDevs, where we tweet about everything we're up to. Oh, nice. Congratulations on starting your coding journey. And there is everyone. I mean, okay, so I was about to say, of course you can do Hacktoberfest, but you do literally have a day left, and that's going to be very stressful. So don't worry about your ability. A week is plenty of time. We can get you set up. Come join us in the Hacktoberfest Discord. Discord.gg/Hacktoberfest. Come hang out with us in there, and we will get you sorted. However, if that sounds really stressful, because there is literally 2 days left, I also appreciate that and don't feel pressured to be forced to do Hacktoberfest. But if you're up for it, we'll get you sorted out. Do not worry. If you want to give it a go, we'll find a project for you and we'll help you out with it. But again, there is 2 days, so I appreciate that's a lot. So that's all from me for tonight. I hope we see you tomorrow for our last show of this wild month. Thank you again to Sam. Thank you again to everyone in the chat. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. And we will see you 2 p.m. tomorrow on the Vonage channel, and then 3 p.m. here shortly after. Farewell, good night.